The Janitor's Secret. Daniel Whitfield had mopped the same stretch of hospital corridor for 11 years, and in all that time, no one had ever asked him why a man with a Rolex tan line on his wrist pushed a bucket for a living. That changed on a Tuesday in November, the night his daughter-in-law decided to humiliate him in front of 23 dinner guests. "Daniel, sweetheart, could you check if we're out of napkins? I think there's more in the hall closet." Vanessa Cole Whitfield said it sweetly, the way she said most cruel things, with a smile stretched so wide it looked painful, "since you're so good at, tidying up." A ripple of laughter moved down the long table. Not everyone laughed. His son Michael didn't, but enough people did that the sound of it settled into Daniel's chest like a stone dropped into still water. He set down his fork. "I'll check," he said quietly and stood. He did not check. He walked out onto the back porch of his son's house, into the cold November air, and looked up at the stars for a long moment, breathing slowly, the way he'd taught himself to breathe 30 years ago in rooms far more dangerous than this dining room. Then he went back inside, picked up a stack of napkins from the closet exactly where Vanessa knew they'd be, and set them on the table without a word. "See," Vanessa said, beaming at her friends from the country club. "He's wonderful. Michael's father, just the sweetest man. Works down at Ashford Memorial pushing a mop around. Not everyone's cut out for more, and honestly, I think there's real dignity in that." Daniel sat back down. He picked up his fork. He said nothing. But somewhere behind his calm grey eyes, a decision was already forming. To understand why Daniel let it happen, why he sat through dinner after dinner absorbing Vanessa's small cruelties without correcting a single one of her assumptions, you would have to go back 34 years, to a version of Daniel Whitfield that no one at that table had ever met. In 1992, Daniel had been an engineer at a small robotics firm in San Jose, the kind of company that lived paycheck to paycheck on defense contracts and pure stubbornness. He was 26, married to a woman named Ruth who believed in him more than he believed in himself, and possessed of an idea that his bosses called impractical and his colleagues called insane: a modular actuator system that could be manufactured cheap enough to put precision robotics into ordinary factories, not just aerospace labs. They fired him for pursuing it on company time. It was the best thing that ever happened to him. He and Ruth mortgaged everything they owned to start Whitfield Dynamics out of a garage in Sunnyvale. For 6 years they ate ramen and slept 4 hours a night and nearly lost the house twice. Then in 1998, a mid-sized automaker in Michigan bought 400 of his actuator units for a new assembly line, and everything changed. By 2005, Whitfield Dynamics supplied precision components to 4 of the 6 major American automakers. By 2012, they'd expanded into medical robotics, surgical arms, prosthetic joints, rehabilitation exosuits, and Daniel Whitfield's name sat quietly on patents that were, by then, worth more than he could easily calculate. He never became a public figure. That had been Ruth's doing, in a way. She used to say that money changes how people look at you, and she wanted people to keep looking at Daniel the way she did, like an ordinary, decent man who happened to be extraordinary at one particular thing. He kept the company private. He avoided interviews. He let his COO, a sharp and camera-ready woman named Priya Anand, be the public face of Whitfield Dynamics while he stayed in the labs, where he was happiest, hands in the machinery, solving problems no one else could see yet. Then 4 years ago, Ruth died. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by August, and something in Daniel simply stopped. He handed the CEO title to Priya fully. She'd earned it twice over, and he told the board he needed distance. Not retirement. Distance. He sold his mansion in Los Altos, moved into a modest 2-bedroom house 20 minutes from his son's family, and for reasons he found difficult to explain even to himself, he took a job as a janitor at Ashford Memorial Hospital, the hospital where Ruth had spent her last 4 months. It wasn't a breakdown, though people who didn't understand tended to assume that. It was something closer to penance, or maybe therapy, though he'd never used that word. There was something about the quiet, physical rhythm of mop and bucket, of fixing a squeaky door hinge, of being invisible in hallways where he used to sit gripping Ruth's hand, that let him breathe again. Nobody at Ashford Memorial knew that the tired, soft-spoken man who cleaned the West Wing at night owned the patent on the very surgical robot 2 floors up that had bought them all 4 extra months with Ruth. He liked it that way. It was the one place in the world where nobody wanted anything from him. His son Michael knew the truth, of course. Michael was 31, an architect, kind-hearted and a little too eager to please, and he'd begged his father more than once to just tell people, to stop letting himself be underestimated. Let them think what they think, Daniel always said. It's restful. What Daniel hadn't accounted for was Vanessa. Michael had married Vanessa 2 years earlier, a whirlwind courtship that Daniel had watched with the cautious optimism of a father who wanted his son to be happy more than he wanted to be right about anything. Vanessa was smart, ambitious, sharp-elbowed in the way some people become when they've spent a childhood without much and are determined never to go back to it. She worked in marketing for a regional bank and had, Daniel suspected, married slightly beneath the life she'd imagined for herself, which was perhaps why she spoke of Michael's modest architecture salary with a faint, persistent disappointment. She thought she hid better than she did. And Daniel, quiet, unassuming, uniform-wearing Daniel, had become in Vanessa's mind a kind of embarrassing footnote to the family, someone to be managed, explained away at dinner parties. She'd never once asked him a real question about his life before Ashford Memorial. She'd simply decided, the moment Michael mentioned his father's job, that she knew exactly who Daniel Whitfield was, and she never revisited the assumption. That was the story of the mop and bucket comment, and the closet check comment, and the dozen other small humiliations that had accumulated over 2 years like sediment at the bottom of a river. Daniel absorbed them because he genuinely didn't care what strangers thought of him, because he loved his son too much to make Vanessa's insecurities into a battlefield, and because, if he was honest with himself, some tired, grieving part of him almost welcomed being underestimated. It meant nobody expected anything from him. It meant nobody needed him to be Daniel Whitfield, founder of Whitfield Dynamics. He could just be a man with a mop, and that had felt, for a long time, like the only kind of peace available to him. But there was a difference between being underestimated and being humiliated in front of 23 people at his own son's table, on the anniversary week of Ruth's death, no less, a detail Vanessa had either forgotten or never known, because Michael, in his exhaustion, had never mentioned it to her. Daniel drove home that night in silence. He sat in his car in the driveway for nearly 20 minutes before going inside. Then he picked up his phone and called Priya Anand for the first time in 8 months. Daniel, Priya's voice, even at 10 at night, carried the particular alertness of someone who has learned never to assume a late call is good news. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Daniel said. I have a question for you. The Ashford Memorial Regional Gala. It's still on the calendar for December, isn't it? The one where we're unveiling the new pediatric exosuit line. It is. You said you wanted no part of it. I've changed my mind, Daniel said. I want to attend. And Priya, I want you to let me handle the announcement myself this year. There was a pause on the line, the sound of Priya recalibrating. In 11 years, Daniel had never once wanted to be at the center of anything. You want to give the keynote? I want to give the keynote, Daniel confirmed. And I have one more request. I need you to send an invitation to my son and his wife, Michael and Vanessa Cole Whitfield. Formal invitation, gala committee letterhead, the works. Don't mention my name on it, just list them as special guests of Whitfield Dynamics. Another pause, shorter this time. Priya Anand had known Daniel for 16 years. She'd learned to recognize the particular stillness in his voice that meant he'd made up his mind about something, and further discussion was, at best, decorative. Understood, she said. Anything else? One more thing, Daniel said, and for the first time that night, something like a smile entered his voice. I'll need my old suit, the grey one, it should still fit. The invitation arrived at Michael and Vanessa's house 11 days later, embossed cream cardstock, gold lettering, the kind of thing that announced its own importance before you'd even opened it. Vanessa nearly dropped her coffee reading it. Michael, she held it out with both hands like it might combust. Michael, this is from Whitfield Dynamics, the medical robotics company. They want us at their gala. Their gala, Michael. Do you know who goes to these things? Board members, hospital administrators, people with actual money. Michael, who knew exactly why they'd been invited, and had been sworn to secrecy by his father with the seriousness of a man discussing nuclear codes, did his very best impression of mild surprise. Huh, weird, why us? Who cares why? Vanessa was already on her phone, searching for a dress. This is the kind of event that changes things, Michael. This is the kind of room you meet people in. We are going, and we are going to look like we belong there. She spent $400 on a dress she couldn't really afford and didn't tell Michael the exact figure. She researched Whitfield Dynamics obsessively for a week, memorizing facts about the company's history to drop casually into conversation, the garage founding, the automaker contracts, the reclusive founder nobody had photographed in almost a decade. Isn't it wild, she said to Michael 3 separate times, that the guy who started this whole company just, vanished. Some men do that. Get rich, get weird, disappear. I bet he's some paranoid hermit type. Probably has a beard down to his knees by now. Michael, mopping actual sweat off his own forehead with a napkin, said, probably, and changed the subject. Daniel, for his part, spent that same week at Ashford Memorial exactly as he always had, running the buffer over the West Wing floors, fixing the hinge on supply closet 4B, trading quiet jokes with Rosa from the night shift about her grandson's little league team. Nobody there knew what was coming either. He liked it that way, right up until the moment he wouldn't be able to keep it that way any longer. The gala was held in the atrium of the newly finished Whitfield Pediatric Robotics Wing, a soaring glass-ceilinged space that Michael, walking in with Vanessa on his arm, actually recognized from architecture trade publications. He'd studied this building. He hadn't put it together in the chaos of the last 2 weeks that his own father owned the patents inside the machines 2 floors above them. Vanessa was radiant, working the room like she'd been born to it, laughing at the right moments, complimenting the right people's shoes. She'd had 2 glasses of champagne and was, Michael thought, having possibly the best night of her professional adjacent life. "There's a stage," she whispered to Michael, tugging his sleeve as the lights dimmed and a hush moved through the crowd. "Oh my God, is the founder actually going to show up? Everyone said he never does this." Priya Anand stepped up to the podium first, her voice warm and practiced. "Thank you all for being here tonight. 6 years ago, we made a promise to the families of this hospital that the technology saving adult lives in this building would someday save children's lives too. Tonight, that promise becomes real." A round of applause. "And it's my honor, for the first time in nearly a decade, to introduce the man whose vision built this company from a garage in Sunnyvale into what stands around you tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, our founder, Daniel Whitfield." Vanessa's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. For one long, suspended second, she thought she'd misheard. Then the side doors opened, and a man walked out onto the stage in a perfectly tailored grey suit, silver-haired, calm-eyed, carrying himself with the unhurried gravity of someone who had never once needed to prove anything to a room. And Vanessa's stomach dropped through the floor of the atrium because she knew that face. She had watched that face apologize for being out of napkins. She had watched that face push a mop bucket down a hallway. She had 11 days ago told a table of her closest friends that there was real dignity in that face's simple little life. "Oh my God," she whispered, so quietly only Michael heard it. "Oh my God, Michael, is that?" "That's my dad," Michael said, and for the first time in 2 years of biting his tongue, he let himself enjoy a small, private moment of satisfaction. "Yeah." Daniel didn't look for them in the crowd, not at first. He spoke instead about Ruth, about a hospital bed on the 4th floor of this same building, about a robotic arm that had bought her 4 extra months. About how he'd spent those months learning that the most important skill any engineer could have wasn't precision. It was patience, the willingness to sit quietly beside someone and simply be present. He talked about grief, and about how after Ruth died, he'd needed to remember what it felt like to be useful in small, unglamorous ways. How he'd spent the last 4 years mopping the floors of the very wing where she'd been treated, not as some eccentric stunt, but because it had, in its own strange way, kept him alive. "There is no work beneath dignity," Daniel said, his eyes finally moving across the crowd until they found his son, and beside his son, a woman in a very expensive dress whose face had gone the color of the tablecloths. "I've learned that better than most. I've swept these floors. I've built these machines. Both jobs taught me something. Only one of them taught me the same thing twice, that the people who look past you, who decide what you're worth before they've bothered to ask, those people tell you everything about themselves and nothing at all about you." He let that sit in the room for a moment, not unkindly, not even really aimed at anyone in particular as far as most of the audience could tell. Only 3 people in that atrium understood exactly who those words were for. "Thank you all for being here," Daniel finished. "Let's go save some kids." The applause was thunderous. Vanessa did not clap. She stood frozen, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, watching her father-in-law descend the stage steps with the easy confidence of a man who had never, not once, needed her approval, and understanding, with a hot wash of shame crawling up her neck, that every single person at the table 2 weeks ago had heard her call this man just a janitor. Daniel found them 20 minutes later, near the edge of the room, where Vanessa had retreated with the specific stillness of someone trying very hard not to be noticed. "Vanessa," he said her name gently. There was no triumph in his voice, no edge. "You look lovely tonight." Daniel, her voice cracked on the word. She was, Michael would later admit he'd never seen, close to tears. "I didn't know. I said such an awful thing at dinner. I never should have. I made assumptions and I was cruel about it, and I am so sorry." Daniel considered her for a long moment. He thought about Ruth, who had always believed that people revealed their best selves not in triumph, but in the moment right after they'd been caught being small. He thought about how easy it would be to let Vanessa sit in this shame a while longer, and how little satisfaction that would actually give him. "I never told anyone the truth about myself for exactly this reason," he said finally. Not because I was ashamed of the mop, because I wanted for a little while to just be a person nobody needed anything from. That's a kind of freedom, Vanessa. Most people never get to have it. He paused. You weren't wrong that there's dignity in ordinary work. You were wrong about what that dignity means. It doesn't come from a job title, high or low. It comes from how you treat the people in front of you when you think it costs you nothing to be unkind. Vanessa nodded, wiping carefully beneath her eyes so as not to ruin her makeup, and for the first time in 2 years, Daniel watched something in her face soften into something honest. I'd like the chance to actually get to know you, she said quietly. The real version, not the version I decided you were. I'd like that too, Daniel said, and meant it. He didn't quit his job at Ashford Memorial. That surprised the board, though Priya, who understood him best, wasn't surprised at all. 3 nights a week, Daniel Whitfield still pushed a mop down the West Wing corridor, still fixed the hinge on 4B when it started squeaking again, still traded jokes with Rosa about her grandson's batting average. But now once a month he had dinner with his son and his daughter-in-law, and Vanessa had stopped making jokes about napkins entirely. She'd learned the hard way, the thing Daniel had known all along, that the truth about a person is rarely the first assumption you reach for, and that the ones who let you underestimate them are very often the ones with nothing left to prove.